Hello, everybody. I'm Sudha Jamthe, and this is Weekly Wednesday at Business School of AI. Today, I'm doubly excited because every opportunity I get to talk about my students makes my day extra special. And we have Ananya Sen, who's an AI product manager. And one of my students, I think from Stanford, and also here at Business School of AI, you did the Capstone AI Lab. She is going to be our host. And the way we are doing this I see some new faces here. This is our happy reunion of past and present students. And we get to have a speaker series every Wednesday at this time. And we have an international mix of people. I see people from various countries, various time zones joining us. Thank you for the time. So you get the best value when you interact and ask your questions, put it in chat, and we'll get started soon. May's theme is going to be about demystifying complexity. And I believe complexity is something that you all see as innovators when you're going into new spaces. And today, specifically, we are going to be focusing on transportation industry and how to demystify that transformation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Ananya. Ananya, take it away. I'm going to go off video and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Sudha. And Evangelos is here. Sudha, if you could please make him co-host as well.
Yes.
So I have a short intro to show us what the current state of problem is.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background? Maybe you have that planned in the slides.
Yes. Okay. So can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to Weekly Wednesday at the Business School of AI. Our main theme is to demystify complexity of different AI solutions. And today we will focus on urban mobility and the journey to transportation transformation. So why do we need to have this conversation? Today, in the 21st century, we are all stuck in traffic. Traffic congestion is still haunting us, and in United States alone, 28% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from transportation. So we need a more swift business model to reach the vision that McKinsey has put forth in this analysis. So as per McKinsey's analysis, we will attain a huge transformation in urban mobility to reach 35% autonomous taxis and public shuttles by the year 2030. But this journey is very complex. So I am really excited to have with us today Evangelos Simoudis. He is the co-founder and managing director of Synapse Partners. He is a technologist, a venture investor, entrepreneur, corporate executive, serves on several advisory boards in education and even the US Department of Transportation. And very excitingly, he has recently published his new book on transportation transformation. And a little bit about me. I have been in the software profession for more than 10 years, have built products in fintech and e-commerce, and recently working on cybersecurity and fraud analytics. I have also taken some exciting classes with Sudha at the Business School of AI and Stanford Continuing Studies. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Evangelos, and I would request the audience to please post your questions in the chat, and we can take up the questions after Evangelos' presentation. Thank you so much.
So, excuse me, good morning or good evening to all of you, and thank you for the opportunity to address your audience today. These are obviously interesting times. When I published the book a few months ago, hello to our new audience. Obviously we were in a progressively larger lockdown around the world. So it was an interesting time to be talking about transportation when nobody was moving, or at least were moving within very confined environments. But today, as we reopen economies, it's actually not a bad time to reassess transportation and determine what steps we need to take in order to address some of the issues that Ananya mentioned, as well as many others that arise, particularly in urban transportation. Now, what is interesting, again, as I said, it's a good time to be talking about it. Yesterday, for example, Lyft announced their quarterly results. They show over 100% growth in rides year over year. Again, this compares to 2020 when, as I said, very few people were moving. But what's more interesting, they showed 15% growth quarter over quarter. So that means that people are going out again and they feel comfortable enough to get into this ride-shared vehicles that companies like Uber and Lyft and several others are providing. Now, my work focuses on urban mobility because metropolitan areas globally will become the catalyst for this disruption. And let me share now my screen with you. So can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully you can. Okay. So let's go there. So the book actually has a 4-part thesis. The first part is that the first thesis is that cities must take a leadership role in shaping urban mobility. And the second part is that the best outcomes for urban mobility will come when cities and metropolitan area cities, I use those terms often interchangeably, at least for the purpose of this presentation. But cities, automakers, and companies that provide mobility services, whether these are the new style of companies like micromobility or ride sharing, as well as more legacy companies, including car rental, taxis, limos, they will need to collaborate in order to get the best outcomes. But before they can do that, they will need to transform. And finally, when this transformation is successful, it will give rise to new value chains and new value exchange models. Now, I think what is pertinent about the conversation here that you have in this class is that, and as I will say in a few minutes, data and AI are a very important glue in this change, in this transformation. So it is particularly important to consider what they can add and what are some of the risks that they introduce as we look into this transformation. To properly shape the urban mobility disruption, these metropolitan areas must approach urban transportation not as a set of silos, which is today, but as an integrated system. And they need to think of this integrated system as one that can provide safe, affordable, and convenient transportation for everybody with the right customer experience. I mean, one of the reasons that on-demand mobility companies, app-based on-demand mobility companies, became extremely successful over the past few years is because they, through their application and the activities that their applications enable, the interactions that their applications enable, they have been able to provide extremely good passenger and user experience, let's call it, compared to what their predecessor taxis and limos services and car rental companies were able to provide. Now, this transformation, from cities approaching transportation as a set of silos to approaching it as a system, as I say in the book, will take place over 3 phases. The first phase we've already been through, and that's the introduction of the app-based on-demand mobility. And what that brought, as I said a minute ago, was the convenience and also transparency. You knew when the vehicle will arrive, you knew where the vehicle was, and you more importantly, you knew what the price you're going to pay was going to be in advance of the ride. During the second phase that we are in right now, we will see cities starting to collaborate with the on-demand, the app-based mobility services companies. And again, this is not only about ride-hailing and ride-sharing, but also micro-mobility and goods delivery. Some of these collaborations will be will come by force because governments will demand it. Others will come because of convenience, because both of the constituencies will realize that having these collaborations is an important step forward for their for who they're trying to address. In the case of city, their citizens. In the case of the companies, their customers and shareholders. And through these collaborations, which we're already seeing in over 100 cities around the world, maybe more by now, we will be able to make further strides on affordability, better customer experience, and also safety through fleet management. And finally, by the beginning of the next decade, we will come to a third phase when we'll have this much closer collaboration between now not only mobility services companies and cities, but also automakers who will join this tripartite collaboration, both as vehicle providers, but also as services providers. And in this, by that time, and then for the next several years, we'll be able to see improvements both in affordability of transportation, but also in access of transportation, because by then we will start realizing this dream of seeing transportation and mobility in general provided as a service. Now, these systems that govern urban mobility will consist of highly instrumented infrastructure, highly instrumented cities that will have the right transportation infrastructures, autonomous and automated vehicles that are connected and electrified, a variety of mobility services for both passenger transportation and goods delivery. And finally, all of that will come together through and will be monetized through a variety of business models, many of which will be actually quite new to the transportation industry as we know it today. And as I mentioned before, data and AI will be the glue for connecting these ingredients. Now, such a systems intelligence will be provided that will be provided in several forms. It will come in the intelligence, obviously, that the autonomous and automated vehicles incorporate. Again, as my firm works more and more with both tier one suppliers and automakers, we're getting them to understand how much intelligence these new vehicles will need to incorporate. The second form of the intelligence will be the intelligence in the infrastructures themselves and in their ability to analyze the vast amounts of data now that will be generated through the sensors that are embedded in these infrastructures. And also, in the final form will be the intelligence in the cloud, where all of that data, be it from the vehicle or the infrastructure or other areas, end up in order to be analyzed and then redispersed as additional intelligence that goes, whether it is in the vehicle or the infrastructure, or, as I said, other participants. An important challenge will come from our ability to determine how much of that intelligence, that broad sense of intelligence, will reside in the infrastructure and how much will reside in the vehicle or in the other participants in this system. To date, the approach that we have taken is we are assuming that most of the intelligence will rely on the vehicle. I mean, the way that we evaluate autonomous vehicles, the way we test them, the way that we think about what kind of capabilities they will have, makes that implicit assumption that the vehicle has to be hyper intelligent, whereas we're not assuming that much from the infrastructure. That may not be an unreasonable assumption, but it's an assumption that will need to be reconsidered because, again, based on the results that we are seeing from the early efforts to deploy intelligent vehicles, be it automated or autonomous, particularly in urban settings, lead us to believe that there needs to be a better balance between infrastructure and vehicle in their intelligence. Technology and business models together and not separately will need to become the key dimensions along which these constituencies will need to participate in new mobility. And we are seeing already some of these examples of how this can come together. So we are seeing, for example, in cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas, the collaboration of companies like Waymo, Fiat Chrysler in testing autonomous vehicles for passenger delivery. Also, Phoenix is working with Neuro for goods delivery. These are all trials. Along the business model, we're seeing in Berlin the collaboration of Daimler with a variety of mobility services providers and the city of Berlin to provide more seamless integration among privately owned vehicles, mobility services, and the public transportation, the various modalities of public transportation that the city provides. And then if we were to look at kind of more futuristic of a city becoming kind of the coordinator or even the orchestrator of mobility, we're starting to see in places like Singapore and Shanghai collaborations between and experiments between mobility services companies like Grab and autonomous stack providers like Aptiv and in the case of Shanghai, AutoX, in using these vehicles in a tight integration between all of the modalities that are available in very well-defined parts of the, still small but well-defined parts of these cities. Autonomous vehicles obviously will play a big role in new mobility, both for passenger transportation and goods delivery. For this to happen, we need to see improvements both along technology in order to see increasingly larger operating design domains and more use cases to be addressed by, that can be addressed by autonomous vehicles. We need to see improvements where the consumer trust is increasing, and in surveys that we have done, and some of which are mentioned in the book, we are seeing different degrees of trust depending on the geography. But that would be again very important for the adoption of this vehicle, the broad adoption of these vehicles. And finally, we need to see the right business models that will bring these things together so that autonomous vehicles will not become, as I call them, amusement rides, but will become an enduring and profitable way of providing transportation within urban settings. If we use the diffusion of innovation approach to see where we are today with regards to autonomous vehicles, we'll see that we're still in the very early stages where we have the innovator adoption. And again, even with those stages, we see the different adoption of some of the major use cases that autonomous vehicles are used in. And one of in the case of robo-taxis, in the case of goods delivery vehicles like Neuros or even Starship, that is even a smaller form factor goods delivery vehicle, one of the challenges that we will have is that in an urban environment is that these vehicles have essentially three types of infrastructure that they need to share in the city. I mean, there is the road, there is the micro mobility lane, whether it is a bike lane or scooter lane or whatever that the cities have been establishing. And then there's the sidewalk. And as more of these vehicles are introduced in the urban landscape, we will have a lot of congestion, a lot of conflict in terms of how they share this same infrastructure along with privately owned vehicles and everything else. And I think that will bring to a head a challenge that that cities will need to face and address. And that's why in the book I talk about cities having the role of sometimes of a coordinator or even the orchestrator, like we're seeing particularly in Asia. The new urban mobility model will create new value chains. These value chains will essentially start integrating many of the processes that today are provided in a very siloed manner by a variety of players. And while again, if we think about transportation as a service, mobility as a service, the major processes are what I have in the center of this figure. But really, the value chains start even earlier from the construction of the vehicle all the way out to how the governments interact in the provision of these services. And as we pull together these value chains, and today we're just starting to form them, we will see the participation of both small and large companies, and as investors, as venture investors, we're particularly interested in understanding these value chains because we think that there will be great opportunities for startups to enter them and grow with them. These value chains will be implemented using different models. We are already seeing the emergence of three and a half, different models. So on one end, we see the completely vertical model, OEM-centric. The best example of that would be GM with its Cruise organization, where the OEM is providing everything from the vehicle to the service and the ancillary capabilities that are part of that service: reservation, customer support, fleet maintenance, and the like. I also include Zoox and Amazon, because as Amazon acquires Zoox, they have the opportunity, and Zoox is developing its own vehicles, obviously, they'll have the opportunity to do that vertical model. A second incarnation or a second model is what I call the fleet-centric model, where you have now, you start to see a separation both between the vehicle provider and the transportation services provider. And that can be broken into two parts. We have in companies like, in collaborations between companies like Baidu and Geely in China, or Aptiv and Hyundai here in the United States, we see the vehicles, the intelligent vehicles given to transportation services providers who provide the entire service. In a second incarnation of that model, we see an even a little more separation in the value chain, where we have a set of services provided to the fleet, and obviously a set of vehicles provided to the fleet operator. So we have that collaboration breaking up. And then the third model will be, as I said, when we're starting to see now mobility services, public transportation systems, and vehicles coming together under one model to provide the type of service that we've been discussing. These value chains not only will be very different in their forms compared to what we have today, but they will provide new forms of value, where monetary, so money is not going to be the only form of value that's being exchanged, but data insights, and loyalty will be new forms of value that will be introduced. And finally, the urban mobility as it's being envisioned, at least this transformed urban mobility as it's been envisioned in the book, will not be demonstrated, will not be deployed in the same way across the world. And the book explores three scenarios for this new urban mobility. In one scenario, we see the coexistence of mobility services with privately owned vehicles and the diminishing role for public transportation. We're seeing a lot of that in the United States, where, again, private car ownership, private vehicle ownership is extremely high, and there's not enough money, at least not until recently, that has been going towards public transportation systems. In the second scenario, we look at the dominant role of multimodal public and private transportation coming together. Many of this, much of this transportation will be provided by autonomous vehicles over time, coexisting with privately owned vehicles. And we see that scenario being particularly attractive in European countries, where there's already strong emphasis on public transportation, and the urban scapes give that opportunity for that coexistence and collaboration. And then as a third scenario, we explore the centrally orchestrated multimodal mobility that is offered exclusively as a service using advanced transportation networks. And in many parts of these urban scapes, we see complete removal of privately owned vehicles. And we see that as being realized in brand new cities being built, particularly in Asia, as well as in some other places, maybe a little bit of Europe and maybe small parts of the US over time. So I'll stop here, and I'll now take your questions and any other topic that you like to discuss.
Yes, thank you, Evangelos. Very insightful. So we have a question in the audience. So do you foresee, Richard Mears, he asks, do you foresee a day that vehicles that are not connected become a nuance or even illegal or banned?
It's hard to, I would say it's hard to say and provide kind of like a blanket statement to this. Right now, every vehicle that is being produced around is connected. Now, whether so in other words, it has connectivity capabilities. Whether these capabilities are enabled is a topic actually of very active discussion around the world by automakers, because what automakers are starting to realize is that the amount of data these vehicles are producing can be extremely valuable, extremely rich, but somebody has to pay for its communication, its storage, management, and analysis. And even with vehicles that do not have very high levels of driving automation, so level 3, level 4, the data is significant in size to make both its communication and its, as I said, storage and management an expensive proposition. So I don't believe it will be an issue of whether the vehicles will be connectable. The question is going to be whether that connectivity would be enabled, and who is going to pay for the ability to have that connectivity. When in older vehicles, I mean, vehicles started being connected as early as 2010 with 2G technology. The amount of data that was trickling in was not significant enough, so the automaker was bearing the cost. Now, though, with these higher volumes, it's becoming more of an issue.
Right. So with the whole cost of data storage, connectivity, we also saw recently Lyft sold their AV division to Toyota, and the transaction includes that Toyota would get access to mapping route sensor data from Lyft vehicles. So all this data is coming from the consumer experience as well as they take Lyft ride shares. So what's your thought on this partnership with OEMs, and how does the consumers, the data owners, data privacy come into play here?
So I would say we are involved in many. So the advisory side of our firm is involved in many of these conversations with OEMs and other parties, and so we're kind of like in the midst of the issue. The first point to make is that there are many different kinds of data that is being that's being extracted between, say, vehicle and cloud. And as part of that, there is obviously consumer data, but it's not only about consumer data. So I think sometimes we tend to overemphasize the consumer aspect of the data. There are many other types of data that is created or generated and extracted in the course of mobility, both of humans and goods, that is extremely valuable and does not involve the kind of privacy considerations that we need to have. As I said before, as I said during my remarks, it's data and AI is something that is the glue for new mobility. So if we want to have new mobility, if we want to have safer vehicles, if we want to have more transparency, if we want to have more convenience, if we want to have lower prices in our transportation, we will need to use data and AI. There's no question about it. Okay, so I think what needs to, or what is happening already, is that governments, whether it is city governments or federal governments, they're starting to realize what is the importance of the data and what safeguards need to be placed in that data in order to make sure that we get all the benefits and the conveniences that that the data and its exploitation afford us, but also we protect ourselves. And it's a very similar, again, from my perspective, it's a very similar conversation to what we had as we started to understand more about internet data. Again, when back in 95, 96, 97, we did not have the same appreciation, the same kind of conversation about internet data that we had a few years later, and we continue to have to this day. I think we will have to go through a very similar transition with the corresponding conversations and headaches and conflicts with mobility data. I think on the other hand, on the other side will come much better for having that conversation.
Right. Thank you for that. We have another question in the audience. Emmanuel Bencini, he is a biz dev executive. He asks, do you think each municipality, city will have a different approach to shared mobility, monetization with micromobility, public connected shuttles? All these, will they have to, take different approaches?
So again, like as it happens in every new area, I think a number of different schemes are being tested by different government entities. So if you look at, for example, there's a reason why in the United States, Phoenix has attracted a lot of the trials for autonomous vehicles, because they had a very liberal policy towards testing those vehicles. I can tell you, because we work, as I said, my firm works with automakers and transportation companies in general. Nobody wants to deal with a myriad of different regulations. So, and this is why what I've been saying as early as 2016, 2015, 2016, as the discussion about autonomous vehicles was emerging, is that I think we are extremely optimistic about the adoption of autonomous vehicles in our daily transportation lives, because I think that these debates that will emerge because of the various regulatory regimes that are applied will not be broadly adopted. I mean, there will be good debates, valuable debates, and hopefully over time we will converge to a set of practices and regulations that are that are acceptable within broad geographic areas. So maybe let's say the US will not have the same set of regulations as the European Union, but they will be, in a sense, close enough so that then an automaker that is developing an autonomous vehicle or a mobility services provider that is developing a particular type of service, they will be able to deploy it in more than one city at a time, and without being concerned that they're going to be violating any laws. Because if we stay very fragmented, we will never reach scale. That's the bottom line.
So so in this world of mobility as a service, in your book you mentioned about transportation wallet, and also we just heard from you about loyalty becoming another key part of the value chain as a new currency. Would you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that as we were doing the research for the book, and we talked to several cities, we talked to obviously automakers, mobility services companies, what became apparent is that there is very little knowledge about how the consumer, the total consumer picture of transportation and other uses of mobility. So in other words, a mobility services company, whether it is Uber, Lyft, Didi, you pick up your favorite one, whatever geography you're living in, they have a view of the consumer with regards to the rides that consumer has taken, right? So they may know, how broadly that consumer uses ride hailing or ride sharing, but they do not know how frequently the consumer uses their own vehicle. They don't even know whether the consumer has a vehicle. Okay, and so when I started thinking about understanding mobility in order to be able to for a city, for an urban area to provide mobility as a service, they need to have the same kind of understanding that credit card companies have of their what's called the wallet share in credit cards. So every credit card company knows about their consumer, how many credit cards they have. There are agencies that track that, and also what percent for what percent of their financial transactions they use each of these credit cards. So when you go to let's say Visa, they say, okay, well, they know what wallet share they have for each of these consumers. When you go to American Express, they know the same thing. We don't have the same type of knowledge for the transportation. And I think that if we were to really be serious about providing mobility as a service in an urban environment, we need to understand that, right? So to me, the transportation wallet is my proposal for how that concept can help us measure what's happening in urban areas. And in fact, I had written following the publication of the book, I had done with my team an analysis for a few cities, and I wrote a blog post so I have a blog site called corporateinnovation.co. And I wrote there about the transportation wallet and what it means in various cities and what type of decisions, by understanding the transportation wallet, what kind of decisions the transportation planner, a city's transportation planner can make. So that's about the transportation wallet. Now, so when we talk about, now once we have the understanding of the transportation wallet at some depth, we can start understanding what is the loyalty of that customer towards a particular modality, and then at a second degree towards a particular company. And we're already working with transportation companies. My firm's already working with transportation companies, and we're helping them understand that, right? So that then you can decide, okay, well, what is the consumer's loyalty worth to me? And by the way, when we talk about mobility as a service, it's not only about me as a consumer going from point A to point B, but it's also about what trips I'm avoiding to make because things are coming to me, right? So when I go, for example, in our case, to Safeway's, Safeway's a relatively large supermarket chain. When I go to their website and order a bunch of goods, and I have either their service or some other service deliver it to them, now I'm avoiding to make a trip to the supermarket. So it's not only important to understand what trips I'm making from point A to point B, but also what trips I'm avoiding to make because something is coming to me. And that idea of goods coming to me, as opposed to me going to the goods, will also become an important part of understanding both the transportation wallet and ultimately the loyalty to specific services, right? And that then will become, I think, as an important currency in understanding the value of that service and the value of that relationship, right? What relationship do I have? So if you look at companies like Grab, for example, in Singapore, Southeast Asia, they allow through their so-called super app to order, to both transport yourself, but also to order a bunch of different things that are enabled by transportation, right? And that shows the loyalty, and that becomes an important form of currency, important form of value for the company.
Right. So we will need to understand not only data, but loyalty across modalities and across sectors. And how would you envision connecting these? Say some loyalty data is with a private firm, some is with a
well, again, there are many lessons that we can learn both from pre-internet and what has been happening with, I mean, loyalty, the notion of loyalty and the idea of using data to track forms of loyalty and then monetizing that loyalty is not new. I mean, consumer packaged goods companies have been measuring loyalty for decades. What is new here is that now we're starting to apply that, starting to focus on that for mobility. And again, when we talk about data and AI becoming the glue of this, we're funding a number of companies whose goal is to integrate data, right? So I don't think that the lack of data will be the issue. I think the issue will be finding interesting ways to combine that data and then obviously use AI-based approaches to analyze, to exploit that data to provide the right information, the right insights, whatever you want to call it, to decision makers. And I think in transportation that has not been done to date. It's just now starting to be done.
Right. There are companies providing how much of the curbside is available for micromobility. I mean, all sorts of data integrations. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be surprised from satellite data to, as I said, sensor data to transaction data. Data is not, again, obviously we can get more varieties of data, but I think along with introducing these new varieties, we really need to be making the right steps in how we integrate that data. What data should be integrated, what data should not be integrated. I mean, you were talking earlier about privacy concern. I mean, certain data should not be integrated, right? Because in order to preserve privacy. But there are other types of data that absolutely should be integrated in order to give us that transportation-related, mobility-related insight, which today it is not integrated because we've never had to do it.
Right, absolutely. We have a question in the audience, Catherine. So she says that I believe that in South America, we have different challenges to implement this kind of model. Yes, every country, city, they have their own challenges. And she's curious to know if you have any information about this kind of solution of mobility wallet being implemented in South America.
No, I do not, and I will say that of the research that my team and I did for the book, 99%, maybe even 100%, was focused on Europe, North America, and Asia. With the exception, maybe with a bit of data that is available out of Brazil, maybe Mexico is not South America, Central America, but again, we've been able to get some data there. But in general, there isn't a lot of data, and I will say that there is the data in order to be able to assess transportation wallet. And by the way, I should say that even when we reached out to organizations that are a lot, they're in the data collection business, and we were willing to buy data, we saw very little availability of data from South America. The last comment on this is that if you want to really assess and establish a transportation wallet for a specific region or you need more than one type of data. So even if data from, say, ride-hailing services, there are a few ride-hailing services that operate in more than one country in South America, just having that data is not enough, right? Because you do not have data from public transportation, you do not have data from privately owned vehicles, so you will only be creating a partial view of what constitutes a transportation wallet. So we haven't done. I mean, that's my ultimate point.
Right, right. Definitely an exciting frontier. Another question on sustainability and how we would reach there with this urban mobility transformation. So I was in my research via a startup, an on-demand public shuttle service. They have a very interesting business model. They provide their own shuttles with a dynamic on-demand route mapping algorithm, but they also partner with the cities and government authorities to provide training and tools so that the cities can deploy their algorithms and platforms for the city shuttles. What do you think about that, and how would these different business models lead us to a sustainable value chain?
I'm a big fan of VIA. I'm not an investor in VIA, but I'm a big fan of the company. And I will also add to your participants' comment that VIA is also extremely relevant as we are looking at telework. Because again, my more recent research is starting to touch upon the opportunities that AI has to advance telework. And telework is important not only from an AI perspective, but also from a transportation perspective, because if obviously the more we telework, the less we move. And even if you were to think about commuting is close to 30 in most developed economies. Commuting is 30% of all the rides we take on a daily, on a yearly basis, monthly basis. Right? So what is interesting about VIA is that as we're starting to move out of city centers and move into suburbs, as we're starting to think about as our time to work shifts, when I go to work, the idea of having dynamically determined bus routes becomes extremely important, and that's a great application for AI, by the way, which requires a lot of data ingestion and data processing in order to be able to do these dynamic schedules, to be able to satisfy the customers, to the riders, and make it profitable for the company and provide value to the city. So VIA is onto something big. I will also say, by the way, that VIA is one of the first companies that, in addition to the collaboration that they have with cities, they have great involvement from Daimler, from Mercedes. So this is, again, an early example of where city mobility services provider and automaker work together in order to achieve a specific goal. So I think that as both as cities are looking to provide better service, as well as we start, if the trends that started during the pandemic continue and we start to move away from the city center but still stay within the metropolitan area, which means more work sites at the suburb as opposed to the downtown area, the so-called downtown area. I think models like VIA's will become extremely important. I should say, by the way, again, around this area, one last comment is that we are doing, through one of the companies we have funded, we are doing a lot of analyses for cities to help them understand at a very detailed level how mobility is taking place within their confines, and particularly transportation planners, city, county, whatever, regional level. They did not, from what we've been told, they did not have that level of access to that type of detailed data and that type of analysis to help them with their planning. And this was something that came through the research that I was doing for the book. And as a result of that, we ended up funding a company that is involved now in that type of analysis with quite nice early success after that.
Right. Thank you so much. I must mention a disclaimer, we are not affiliated with VIA in any way, but definitely, yes, we do need more partnerships like this with the AI solutions, with OEMs and the cities. I want to be respectful of your time. Would you have a closing advice, comment for the audience? We are a group of enthusiastic product leaders, business creators, and yeah, any closing comments?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. These are great questions, by the way, and I always appreciate interacting with it. One of the things that I miss about this Zoom-centric world is the fact that I no longer go to conferences, or at least the last year and a half, I haven't been able to go to conferences and talk to an audience live. There's both from my teaching days, which are long gone, as well as, my more recent speaking days. I get a lot of energy from having good interaction with the audience. So this is something that I miss. Look, I think that, my background is in AI, big data and machine learning. So I look at transportation. I got into transportation and mobility, not because I have studied transportation and mobility, but because I see it as a great opportunity for data and AI, as a great application of data and AI. And the more, so I've been involved in that now since roughly 2014, 2015. And the more I got into it and continue to get into it, the more I realized what a fertile ground it is for a radical innovation through the use of data and AI. And not because of only the commercial success that our firm has to advise large corporations and through the returns that we get from the startups that we have invested in, and but also from a pure intellectual perspective, we see this as a great space. It's a great bet that we made, as I said, back in 2014, 2015, when Matt and I were starting the firm. So for those of your audience that is interested in applying AI and using data and applying AI in mobility, I think there are great rewards. There will be great rewards. So I urge you to think about it very seriously. There are other, again, AI is starting to find its whatever this is going to be, probably its third spring. I mean, I was an engineer during the second spring back in the 80s and early 90s. Let's call this the third spring of AI. It is becoming, its value is realized and it's appreciated by many industries and many processes. But I think the processes and tasks associated with mobility hold great value, great promise.
Absolutely. With that, thank you so much, Evangelos. It's a great pleasure having this conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stop the recording. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ananya.
Thank you, Sudha.